just burned up the freeways to get down and join you all as well. So, the biggest thing I want to say to everyone here is thank you. Thank you from the very bottom of my heart. We would not be in this runoff today if it weren't for you. We weren't supposed to be here. A year and a half ago when this campaign started, there wasn't a soul in the state of Texas that thought we had a president. We were running against the sitting lieutenant governor of the state who had universal name ID and unlimited cash. We started at 2% in the polls. Margin of error was 3%. Meant we could have been at -1. And what happened was absolutely incredible. We're in the runoff because Tea Party leaders, because Republican women, because conservative activists all over the state of Texas said enough. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. We can't keep sending the same business as usual establishment politicians to Washington. We got to turn things around. Absolutely nobody in the Austin political class thought what happened on Election Day was remotely possible. We are in this runoff because of each and every one of you, and the biggest thing I want to say is thank you. You know, I want to pose two questions. What do we need, and how do we get it? What do we need? Well, even more fundamental than that. Our nation's in crisis. We're going broke. Our national debt is $16 trillion. It's larger than the gross domestic product of our country. We're on the path to where Greece and Italy find themselves. And the biggest difference is there are nations that can bail out Greece. There ain't nobody big enough to bail us out. Barack Obama is the most radical president this country's ever seen. But the unhappy truth is, Obama didn't invent spending. It was a bipartisan problem long before Barack Obama got elected. And something incredible happened in 2010. We saw a tidal wave sweeping this country. As all over the country, Americans said, we are fed up with the same tired establishment incumbents who don't believe a darn thing. It's been career politicians of both parties that have gotten us in this mess. And in 2010, Americans said, give us new leaders like Marco Rubio, like Mike Lee, like Rand Paul, like Pat Toomey, like Ron Johnson. Now fast forward to 2012. We began the year in 2012 with the mainstream media heralding the Tea Party is dead. How many of y'all saw what happened in Indiana? And Nebraska? And Wisconsin? As Mark Twain famously observed, rumors of our death were much exaggerated. What do we need more than anything else? We need strong conservatives and fighters. The time for putting your finger in the wind and seeing which way it blows has passed. That's how we got in this mess. Is we've had too many Republicans in Washington who didn't stand for anything. And all over the country, people are saying, give us someone who will stand for liberty and the Constitution and stop the spending. It ain't that complicated. It's not that difficult to utter the words, no. Yet for some reason, it seems so many people in Washington can't get that syllable out of their mouth. I've spent a lifetime fighting for the Constitution. I served 5.5 years as the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state, in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. I served under Greg Abbott, the finest Attorney General in the entire country. During the time I served, over and over again, Texas led the nation fighting for conservative principles. We defended the Ten Commandments monument on the state capitol grounds. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court and we won 5-4. We defended the Pledge of Allegiance when a federal court of appeals struck it down because it includes the words "one nation under God." We went to the U.S. Supreme Court and we won unanimously. We defended the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. We went to the Supreme Court and we won 5-4. Right now, I'm incredibly honored to be representing over 3 million veterans all over this country, defending the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial. A monument erected over 75 years ago to honor the men and women who gave their lives in World War I. The ACLU sued challenging that monument, and the Federal Court of Appeals ordered that 75-year-old memorial to our troops torn down. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court and we won 5-4. And the biggest fight of my tenure is a case many of y'all know very well. Medellin versus Texas. Medellin began with a really horrific crime where an illegal alien gang raped and murdered 2 teenage girls. And the case took a very, very strange turn because the World Court, the judicial arm of the United Nations, issued an order to the United States to reopen the convictions of 51 murderers across this country. It's the first time in history a foreign court has ever tried to bind the U.S. justice system. Texas stood up and we fought the World Court. I argued this case twice in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. On the other side were 90 foreign nations, and on the other side was the President of the United States. The President signed an order that attempted to order the state courts to obey the World Court. So Texas stood up, we fought the World Court, we fought the United Nations, we fought 90 foreign nations, and we fought the President of the United States. We defended U.S. sovereignty, and we won 6-3.
The 91, they were outnumbered. That was the problem. The 1 was just more than the 90. They needed more guys on their team.
There you go. That's exactly right. Look, if it's the state of Texas against 90 nations, those odds ain't fair. That's the record I'm running on. It's the record of a strong conservative and a fighter, because I think there's never been a time in Washington when we've had a greater need for a strong conservative and a fighter. Just this week, President Obama tried on his emperor hat. And he decreed amnesty for 800,000 people here illegally. Now, I got to admit, my copy of the Constitution somehow didn't have an authority for the president just to ignore federal law. In fact, my copy of the Constitution says that the president has a responsibility to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And yet this is a president who over and over again has demonstrated contempt for the Constitution. Whether it is refusing to enforce our immigration laws, or refusing to enforce the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, or simply making up a moratorium on offshore drilling.
Yes. Yes.
You know, when he did that, I represented the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and 29 chambers of commerce up and down the Gulf Coast challenging the offshore drilling moratorium in federal court. The Federal Court of Appeals agreed with us that it was contrary to federal law. But he ignored it.
Yep.
That's right, he just reissued the moratorium and de facto stopped granting permits. We gotta have a fighter who will stand up and defend our liberty.
Amen.
Many of y'all know my dad, Raphael Cruz. He's a pastor north of Dallas, and he's been my hero my whole life. He was born in Cuba, and as a kid, he found himself fighting in the Cuban Revolution. When he was 17, he was thrown in prison and tortured, beaten almost to death. He fled Cuba when he was 18 years old and arrived in Texas in 1957. Couldn't speak English. He had nothing except for $100 sewn into his underwear. And he got a job washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour, paid his way through the University of Texas. He and my mother ended up starting a small business, a seismic data processing company in the oil and gas business. So I grew up in Houston as the son of two small business owners. I'll tell you, it is an incredible blessing to be the child of an immigrant who fled oppression. It makes you realize how fragile and how precious our liberty is. As I said, my dad has been my hero my whole life, but you know what I find most incredible about his story? How commonplace it is. Every one of us in this room has a story just like that in our backgrounds. Whether it's us, or our parents, or our great-great-great-grandparents. The history of this country for centuries is people from all over the world fleeing oppression and coming here seeking liberty and opportunity. And I'm going to suggest to you that's the fundamental DNA of what it means to be an American, to value liberty and opportunity above all else. And I often like to think of the great state of Texas as America on steroids. So that's what we need. A strong conservative and a fighter in Washington. How do we get it? The answer is simple. For conservatives to unite and for the grassroots to stand up. We weren't supposed to be in this runoff. My opponent spent over $10 million of his own money flooding the airways with false negative attack ads. And what happened was each of you stood up and said, don't believe the nonsense. We were outspent 5-1. Every political consultant, every lobbyist in Austin said, you cannot win. You'll be pummeled with these ads, you'll drop to single digits and the race is over. And what happened was Tea Party activists and Republican women and conservative leaders and precinct chairs all over the state of Texas rose up together and said, we're tired of business as usual. The Texas Senate race can't be bought. We've seen just about every major conservative leader in the state of Texas unite behind this campaign. From Kelly Shackelford, to Kathy Adams, to David Barton, to Peggy Venable, to George P. Bush, to George Strait, to Ernie Angelo, to Tim Lambert. And we've seen just about every major conservative leader nationally unite behind this campaign. From Sarah Palin, to Sean Hannity, to Rick Santorum, to Ed Meese, to Phyllis Schlafly, to Mark Levin. To Dr. James Dobson, or as my opponent calls them, the DC insiders. You know, I gotta say, if Sarah Palin and Mark Levin and James Dobson are DC insiders, hallelujah! We have truly turned this country around. Look, we're storming the castle. What's it going to take to win this race? We are 42 days out from the runoff. The runoff is July 31st. It is 6 weeks from today. In the next 6 weeks, we know to a certainty that my opponent will drop at least another 10 million into yet more false negative attacks. By the end of it, if you thought the primary was ugly, it's going to look mild. You are going to hear that I am a one-legged leprous axe murderer.
Wow.
For the record, I have 2 working legs. But you know,
Name ID too.
thanks to David Dewhurst, who spent $10 million, he tripled our name ID.
Any press is better than none.
The incredible thing about a runoff is a runoff will be decided by the conservative grassroots. In a runoff, the people who show up, particularly in the middle of the summer on July 31st, are the most passionate, the most motivated, the most informed primary voters. Y'all will vote on July 31st. Or before. Our base of support from the beginning has been the conservative grassroots. How do we get it? I need your help. Y'all got me here. We are in this runoff because of you, but the biggest thing I would ask right now is for every one of you to double and redouble your efforts. And I would ask for 2 things in particular. Number 1, in the primary, do you know we actually raised the same amount of money David Dewhurst did? That is nuts. That is, look, we're running the insurgent conservative grassroots campaign. We're not supposed to raise as much money as the sitting lieutenant governor, who every lobbyist in the state had to write a check to. Both of us raised $6.5 million in the primary. What's very interesting, though, is if you drill down on the numbers. Our money came from over 22,000 donors in over 850 Texas cities and from all 50 states. His came from 3,000 donors. Our average contribution was about $165. His average contribution was over $1,600. He is supported by just about every lobbyist in the city of Austin and most of the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. We're supported by 22,000 conservatives all over Texas and all over the country. So the first thing I would ask every one of you to do is when you go home tonight to go to tedcruz.org and make a contribution. He'll drop another $10 million of his own money in. We will be outspent. But we've got to raise at least $2 or $3 million in the runoff so we can respond to the attacks that are coming out. Now the maximum in the runoff for anyone to contribute is $2,500 a person, $5,000 a couple. If it is humanly possible for you to max out, to contribute $2,500 a person or $5,000 a couple, I would ask you to prayerfully consider doing so. We've got to have the resources to defend ourselves against the onslaught coming. If that's not something you can do, then I would ask every one of you to contribute whatever you can. To go and contribute $25, $50, $100, whatever you can, because it's been 22,000 conservatives all over Texas that have given us the resources to get our message out. And then the second thing I would ask you is we need your help turning out the vote. A runoff is entirely about turnout. I would ask every one of you to move heaven and earth to make sure you vote on July 31st or during early voting the week before, and for every one of you to commit to getting 10 others to show up and vote. Listen, if this race were just decided by the Tea Party activists, how many of y'all were at the state Republican convention a week ago? What an incredible gathering. I mean, that was breathtaking. What a testament to the passion of the conservative grassroots. You know, if this race were decided just by the 10,000 delegates at that convention, it'd be over. I mean, it was jaw-dropping and breathtaking. But what I would ask each of you to do is reach behind and reach beyond the other activists, the other people who are engaged, the other people who are following this, to the people that are focused on other things, who are not paying close attention. To reach out and identify our voters and get them there. 1.4 million people voted in the primary. Typically, you have a 50% drop-off in the runoff. If this follows historical patterns, it means 700,000 people will vote in the runoff. If we identify conservatives and get them out, we win. If conservatives show up to vote, we will win this race. And I'll make a promise to each and every one of you. When we win this race, Texas is going to lead the fight to turn our nation around. And I'm happy to answer any and all questions.